We need this signed.
I know. Just a moment.
His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen. The strange part? Julian wasn't in danger. He was sitting in a luxury office on the 42nd floor, surrounded by people who had spent the last 7 years helping him get to this exact moment. In front of him was a $5 million deal. His biggest deal yet. The kind of deal people dream about when they're still struggling to pay their bills. His business partners were smiling. His lawyers were waiting. Someone had already opened the champagne. All Julian had to do was sign his name. But when he picked up the pen, his fingers started trembling. His chest tightened. His breathing became shallow. And suddenly, the man who had spent 7 years chasing this exact moment couldn't make himself take the next step. If you've ever achieved something you thought would make you happy, only to feel strangely empty afterward, keep watching. Because what happened to Julian wasn't really about the $5 million. It was about what happens when your ambition becomes so deeply connected to your identity that you can no longer tell the difference between what you want and who you think you're supposed to be. Julian was 34, intelligent, disciplined, and successful. From the outside, his life looked almost perfect. But he hadn't always had money. Growing up, his family struggled. There were months when bills were a source of constant tension. Julian remembered watching his parents worry about money and learning, very early, that financial security wasn't something everyone could take for granted. He hated that feeling. The uncertainty, the helplessness, the way money could change the atmosphere of an entire house. So Julian made himself a promise. He would never live like that again. He would become wealthy. He would become respected. He would become so successful that nobody would ever be able to make him feel powerless again. And for a while, that promise gave his life direction. At 27, he believed a promotion would finally make him feel secure. Then he got it. But the relief didn't last. So he set another goal, a bigger position, then a larger salary, then his own company, then a major acquisition. Each achievement felt incredible for a moment. Then the feeling disappeared. And Julian had a simple explanation for it. He just wasn't successful enough yet. There had to be another level, another number, another milestone, another room he needed to enter. What he didn't realize was that he wasn't simply chasing success anymore. He was chasing the feeling he believed success was supposed to give him. Safety, worth, control. And every time the feeling disappeared, he assumed the problem was the goal. So he worked harder. Eventually, ambition stopped being something Julian did. It became who Julian was. He was the hard-working one, the disciplined one, the man who came from nothing and built something, the man who never gave up. And that identity was about to become a trap. The first warning sign came 6 months before the $5 million deal. Julian had just received the biggest promotion of his career. His salary had jumped, his office had changed, his name was suddenly appearing in meetings he'd spent years trying to get into. Everyone congratulated him. That evening, Julian drove home. He pulled into his driveway and sat there. For 2 hours, the engine was still running. His phone kept lighting up with messages congratulating him, but he couldn't bring himself to get out of the car. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel relieved. He didn't even feel particularly happy. He felt empty. Eventually, he turned off the engine and went inside. The next morning, he went back to work. He didn't tell anyone, because there was an uncomfortable possibility he wasn't ready to consider. What if something was wrong? Not with his career, not with his salary, with the life itself. So he ignored the feeling and kept going. Then other parts of his life began disappearing. Julian used to play piano. Nothing serious. He never intended to perform for anyone. He simply liked sitting down late at night and playing until his mind became quiet. He also used to write short stories. Again, there was no career plan behind it. He just enjoyed creating something that didn't need to be profitable. But slowly, those things began to feel irresponsible. Whenever Julian sat at the piano, a thought appeared. You should be working. When he opened a blank document to write, another thought followed. This is a waste of time. There was always something more important. Another email, another meeting, another deal, another opportunity. So the piano stayed untouched. The stories stayed unfinished. And Julian became increasingly productive at becoming someone he didn't recognize. Then his body started reacting. During ordinary meetings, his heart would suddenly race, his palms would sweat, his breathing would become shallow. Sometimes he'd have to step outside because he felt like he couldn't get enough air. There wasn't always an obvious trigger, and that frightened him. He couldn't understand why his body seemed so overwhelmed when, according to everyone around him, his life was going exactly as planned. Eventually, he saw a professional about the anxiety and exhaustion. There wasn't one magical explanation. Human beings are complicated. Stress, lack of sleep, prolonged pressure, anxiety, and the conflict between our daily lives and our deeper values can all affect how we feel and function. But Julian began noticing something he'd ignored for years. The things that once made him feel like himself had almost completely disappeared. His entire life had become performance. Work, achievement, money, status, repeat. And this is where the psychology becomes interesting. There is a difference between having ambitious goals and making those goals the foundation of your identity. When a goal is something you want, you can theoretically change your mind. But when the goal becomes proof of your worth, abandoning it feels much more threatening. Because now you're not just asking, do I still want this? You're asking, who am I if I stop pursuing this? For Julian, that question was terrifying. His ambition had started as a way to escape insecurity. Now it had become the very thing keeping him trapped. And there was another problem. The longer he continued, the harder it became to admit that he might not want the destination anymore, because he'd already invested 7 years. 7 years of long nights. 7 years of missed weekends. 7 years of sacrificing hobbies. 7 years of telling himself that the next achievement would finally make everything worth it. Walking away would mean confronting all of that. So he kept going. He started buying expensive watches he didn't particularly care about. Designer clothes. Things that looked impressive but gave him almost no lasting satisfaction. The purchases gave him a brief rush. Then the feeling disappeared. So he'd buy something else. His apartment slowly filled with evidence that he was successful. And somehow, the more evidence he collected, the less successful he felt. His friends noticed the change too. Julian stopped answering calls. Not because he didn't care about them. He simply didn't have the energy to explain why he wasn't happy. Whenever someone asked how work was going, he'd smile. Great. Whenever someone congratulated him, he'd say thank you. Whenever someone told him he was lucky, he'd nod. He became incredibly good at looking fine. And that was the problem. The people around him saw the results. They couldn't see the cost. Then came the $5 million deal. 7 years of work had led to that room. The negotiations were finished. The numbers were agreed upon. The lawyers had approved the final documents. His partners were already celebrating. One signature stood between Julian and the biggest achievement of his career. He picked up the pen, and his hand started shaking. He tried to steady it. It got worse. His chest tightened. His breathing became shallow. Someone asked him if he needed a minute. Julian looked toward the glass wall and saw his reflection. For a moment, he didn't see the successful executive everyone else saw. He saw a tired man. A man who hadn't played his piano in years. A man who couldn't remember the last time he wrote something simply because he enjoyed it. A man who had stopped calling his closest friends. A man who had spent 7 years running toward a destination without asking whether he actually wanted to live there. And suddenly, Julian understood something. The deal wasn't necessarily the thing making him afraid. It was forcing him to confront something he'd been avoiding. If he signed that paper, he would finally have the thing he'd been telling himself would make everything worthwhile. And he already knew how he felt, empty. Julian put the pen down. The room went silent. He stood up. He didn't make a speech. He didn't dramatically announce that he was quitting his career. He simply told his partners he needed some time. Then he walked out and closed his office door. For the first time in years, Julian wasn't trying to solve a problem. He was willing to sit with one. He sat alone in the dark office and thought about the question he'd spent 7 years avoiding. Not, how do I win? But, do I even care about winning this game? That question is uncomfortable, because sometimes the hardest thing to abandon isn't a bad goal. It's a goal that once saved you. Julian's ambition wasn't evil. It had served a purpose. When he was younger, it gave him direction. It helped him escape the instability he'd grown up with. It gave him a sense of control when his circumstances felt uncontrollable. But something that protects you at one stage of your life can become a cage at another. And that's why the sunk cost trap is so powerful. After spending years building something, walking away can feel like admitting those years were wasted. So we continue. Another year, another promotion, another achievement, another number, another milestone. Not necessarily because we still want it, but because we've already invested too much to stop. We confuse persistence with purpose. We confuse endurance with meaning, and eventually we can become incredibly successful at building a life we never actually chose. That's the part nobody tells you about ambition. You can be disciplined and still be going in the wrong direction. You can be productive and still be avoiding the life you actually want. You can reach the top of a mountain and discover you climbed the wrong one. And sometimes the warning doesn't arrive as a dramatic breakdown. Sometimes it looks like sitting in your car for 2 hours because you don't want to go inside. Sometimes it looks like losing interest in the things you once loved. Sometimes it looks like needing another achievement every time the last one stops feeling satisfying. And sometimes it looks like your hands shaking when you finally get everything you thought you wanted. So here's something you can do today. Take the 3 things consuming most of your time and energy right now. Your job, your business, your studies, your relationships, whatever they are. And next to each one, ask yourself, if nobody could see me doing this, would I still want it? That question matters because sometimes we're not chasing the life we want. We're chasing the version of ourselves we think other people will respect. And those aren't always the same thing. If this story made you question the direction you're heading, subscribe. Every week, we uncover the hidden psychology behind ambition, identity, power, and the invisible forces that quietly shape the decisions we think are completely our own. Because the scariest failure isn't missing the goal you spent years chasing. It's reaching it, looking around, and realizing you traded your real life for someone else's prize.